Mahomes back, throws. It is incomplete, picked off by the Lions. Brian Branch with it left side. He's gone, baby. He's going to the house. Touchdown, Detroit Lions. Deflected in the air, Branch ran under it, and he took it all the way back.
Welcome to week 9 of the NFL season. It is the bye week for the Detroit Lions. This is the Twentyman the Huddle podcast. I am Tim Twentyman. This is PJ Clark.
We're back.
We are back. And look, I got a kind of a little fun bye week show for you. We're going to hit up the news real quick as we always do. I got ESPN's Field Yates. He's going to join me, give kind of a national perspective of where the Lions sit at the halfway point. Let's get right to the news, Peach. And obviously, trade deadline week. Lions made a move for Donovan Peoples-Jones, wide receiver out of Cleveland. To me, I think it kind of fits what they needed. When you look at Marvin Jones Jr. stepping away from the team, I think this was one wide receiver injury away from, being in a pretty tough spot with Donovan Peoples-Jones. He's a veteran guy. Just last year, he caught 61 balls for 839 yards and 3 touchdowns. Only has, 8 or 9 catches this year. Yeah. Wasn't as big a part of the offense as he was a season ago, but here's a guy who's 6'2", 200 pounds. He can play outside. He can play inside. He can return kicks. To me, he gives them some depth at that wide receiver core and ensures that position up a little bit.
You've seen it in training camp. This is kind of reminiscent of the Denzel Mims trade. The Lions have been looking for a bigger body. I mean, you made that move that ended up not working out, but again, especially without Marv now, you needed another outside receiver. Yeah. 6'2", 200, can make contested catches on the outside in the boundary.
Not a burner. Not a guy burner, that makes those contested catches and catches in traffic.
Josh Reynolds goes down. The rest of the wide receiver core is like Khalif Raymond, short. Amon-Ra St. Brown, short. You're looking at like Sam Laporta is your only big body option there. This gives you some more depth. It also gives you, a quality punt returner, quality special teams guy in Donovan Peoples-Jones that, can he return kicks? If Khalif goes down, that's another option for returning punts that I think is going to be really interesting. You mentioned it, 18 targets, 8 catches this year. So not so much on the stat sheet right now, but local guy, Detroit native, Lions fan growing up. It's a cool story.
There's a history of production in this league. And I think fans look at the 8 catches and say, oh, wow, we're adding a guy with 8 catches. No, just a year ago, you're adding a guy with 60-plus catches, almost 1,000 yards.
1,800 career yards in 3.5 years.
And a guy who's returned both punts and kicks. So if something happens to Khalif punt return-wise, you've got a guy who's done it at a high level. And he can return kicks too. We'll see what Khalil Dorsey's injury Monday night, if that's serious or not. Might need somebody back there. There's a guy that can step right in and do that as well.
It's low risk. I mean, you're giving up a 6th round pick 2 years from now, so you're taking a shot just to see if you can get kind of a jolt here midseason coming off the bye. I think it's low risk, high reward. You get some red zone production. That's I think what you're looking for.
And I know some fans are probably a little bit disappointed. Saw some of the other names that Chase Young, Montez Sweat, some of those other guys, those edge rushers. You look at this Detroit Lions team, you say, maybe Aiden could have used a little help on the other side, even though I think James Houston's coming back. I think you look at Julian Okwara and what he's done in the last 4 games. He's got 2 sacks in 4 games. I think, 44 pass rush reps or whatever, 2 sacks. That's good production. So maybe they viewed him as a guy that's coming along. And I look at what Brad said when he came in and was asked about, did you look at defense at all? And he said, one, they've got to fit us. And not just from a film perspective, which fans see Montez Sweat, they see Chase Young, they see the number 2 overall pick, they maybe see some sack production, but you've got to trust that Brad Holmes and his staff watch every single snap, see how that would translate to this scheme, some of the games they do up front, some of those things, and he just said it's got to work for us, and it just didn't work for us. And so I think Brad Holmes has earned the trust to say if a guy doesn't fit here, he probably wasn't going to be a great fit either scheme-wise or culturally or whatever it was.
Yeah, I mean, even no cornerbacks ended up getting moved. That was another, we talked about it on Monday night. Mm-hmm. That could be another interesting spot, beefing up the secondary a little bit. Just wasn't there. No big name wide receivers got moved. You make the move for Donovan Peoples-Jones. No corners get moved. Couple edges, but maybe the market just wasn't shaping up. Maybe you didn't want to give up a high 3 that it ends up being like that, and you wanted to keep those picks. And, certainly the draft record reflects well enough that what Brad Holmes can do with the 3rd round pick, you got to feel pretty confident in that. So, it is what it is. This is the group the Lions are going with right now. You could always see what waivers is going to bring. Maybe through the end of the year. Josh Reynolds, obviously a different situation when you had the number 1 waiver claim and you were able to get a guy like Josh Reynolds a couple years ago. But you never know who might end up getting released here.
And some of your own guys back. We mentioned
through
James Houston off the top, maybe CJ Gardner-Johnson at the end of the season. I mean, those are 2 guys that if you get back, that almost seems like making a great trade. They were hurt so early in the season, week 2.
Yeah, you're 6-2.
You're 6-2 without them.
Yeah,
and now you get guys like that can help your pass rush, help your secondary. Hopefully, maybe in December, you'll know for sure if those guys can go back. But I think that's something to remember as well. You've got some guys coming back.
A lot of time left, so this is this is the group that it's going to be now, and you got to see what you can do from here.
Let's talk about some injuries. Scott Daly, I think, is probably the biggest one to come out of Monday night's game. Had surgery, knee injury. Looks like it's going to be a year type thing. And it's too bad for him because he won that competition in training camp. He was playing really, really well. You had never heard Scott Daly's name.
Nope.
And that is exactly what you want as a long snapper. So, we'll see what they do there. They've got to, get somebody in this week.
You got to see what the roster looks like too, because the Donovan Peoples-Jones roster spot was Scott Daly going on IR, so you're gonna have to do a little bit of roster shuffling there as well. Coming off this bye, I think that's gonna be really interesting, and then you're getting guys back from injury.
Yeah, Frank Ragnow, I think I would expect him to be back, and I think it's going to be probably pretty close for Jonah Jackson and for David Montgomery. And so I think offensively, you're going to have all your weapons back. So I think the bye came at an exact perfect time for Detroit.
Dan made a big point of that yesterday.
And the players love that kind of mid-season to break it up into 2. I know in years past they've had it at week 4, week 5. That's early, and that really makes the second 3 quarters of the season a grind. So this is perfect. They've got some injuries they've got to deal with and get back. And I think when they come back and they go to Los Angeles to face the Chargers week 10, it would be right. I think they're going to be in good shape injury wise.
Yeah, you have this long runway now, and everybody go home, get a little break, and you're not going to practice again until next Tuesday. So you got time and things to work on and ways to get this figured out health-wise, but you can also, Coach Campbell made a good point that they're doing self-scout. What has worked through the first 8 games? What can we do better in the next 9?
And you can go to DetroitLions.com and see 5 numbers
that I had
that I thought they did really well the first 8 weeks, and 5 numbers that'll come out on Thursday that I think they need to improve a little bit the second half. So you can check that out.
There are certainly ways to get better. I think there's, Monday was not the cleanest game in the world. Good teams win those games, and you got to win. But there are ways to certainly, can you work Donovan Peoples-Jones into the offense? There are things to take the next, 10 or so days, and then you play a couple games, and I think even more so, you're getting the mini bye after Thanksgiving. 4 weeks more of wear and tear. That's going to be an extra 3 or so days there in a month now too.
100%. And so look, the Lions get to also watch the rest of the league, which is always fun. I know I enjoy that part of it on the bye week and the mini bye always after Thanksgiving. We've had a few of those with a couple Thursday night games. Get a chance to kind of watch some of the other games on Sunday. That's rare for us, but maybe some games that stick out Sunday this weekend. I'll start with one. I think the Minnesota at Atlanta, I think will be an interesting one. Obviously, the Kirk Cousins injury last week towards Achilles done for the year. I think that's a huge blow for Minnesota. They're 2 games behind Detroit. And Atlanta's sneaky 4-4. They've won some games, and I think they're both going to be starting new quarterbacks. I think it's going to be Jalen Hall for
Jaron Hall
for
and
Minnesota and Heineke for Atlanta. So first-time starters for each of these teams. Minnesota trying to stay on Detroit's heels in the NFC North and in the NFC playoff picture. The same thing with Atlanta. I think that's a really interesting game. If Minnesota loses that one, goes behind 2.5 games from Detroit,
it's getting
you're
behind the eight ball
getting
there.
a little urgency there in Minnesota.
Yeah, and then they made a trade for Josh Dobbs yesterday, who's played pretty well this year, and how long does it take him to get up to speed?
Yeah, that's tough for a quarterback position mid-season.
It's gonna be difficult. And he's done a lot of good things in Arizona so far this year, but how desperate do you get if maybe you drop this one to Atlanta? How rushed is that process going to have to be to kind of keep pace with the Lions in the division?
What's another one you're looking at?
Seattle and Baltimore, I think, to me. I mean,
the two teams that beat Detroit,
the Lions, It's the two teams that you lost to. You're thinking, maybe right now Seattle is leading the NFC West, so you might have to go through Seattle in the playoffs now at this point.
They own that important tiebreaker.
Yeah,
and so anytime Seattle loses, you'd like to see that, especially to an AFC opponent.
So you're thinking, how I'm looking at it is, how does Seattle stack up against Baltimore? Because Baltimore is not a Lions problem anymore at this point, but Seattle might be again. So what do they do differently against the Ravens? You have a one-to-one comparison here now, and they struggled against the Browns. Browns have a great defense. They struggled a little bit. They got lucky to pull that game out, and I think Baltimore is going to be a really good matchup for them.
One other one for me, I think in the NFC East, you've got Dallas at Philadelphia.
This is heavyweights. There's some great games.
The first of two between those two, and look, to me, if you're Dallas, are you for real in the NFC? Are you one of those 1-2 teams?
Yeah.
I think you go to Philly and beat Philadelphia. Not only does that help Detroit, now you're only half game back from the number 1 overall seed, but also I think
it puts Dallas
on a path to be right there for the number 1 seed as well, to show that they're one of the best teams in the NFC and that they're a team to be reckoned with. Dallas owns a number 3 overall defense. I think Philadelphia has a number 3 overall offense. So which unit gets the better of who in that matchup? Obviously, two teams that don't like each other. So that'll be a fun one too. That has serious NFC playoff ramifications.
Yeah, because you're looking at it and Seattle leading the West right now and Philly leading the East. But if those flip, San Francisco and Philadelphia could be on the road in round 1 of the playoffs. Isn't that crazy to think about? Which is a crazy statement to say, but those teams could be coming to Ford Field for a potential playoff game, which is something you got to think about. And every NFC loss at this point is going to be really important to all 5 of those teams.
What's maybe one other one you're looking at this week?
I mean, Dolphins-Chiefs has to be the answer.
German fans get a treat, don't they?
German fans get maybe the offensive game of the year.
We get a treat. We get to wake up. 9:30 game
roll out of bed.
Miami and Kansas City. I think there'll probably be a few points scored in that one.
Yeah, I mean, this might be offensive game of the year.
It could be.
This has the potential to be, explosive all over the field. So you're getting maybe some guys back from injury on both sides there, but it's going to be I'm interested to see how Jalen Ramsey got an interception in his first game back. This is a big test for Jalen Ramsey, who is allegedly at 100%. So let's see it overseas.
One other game for me, I think it's hard to say a game is must win in week 9, but when you look at a Rams team with 3 wins, a Green Bay team with 2 wins, Rams going to Green Bay, I think if they want to keep their playoff hopes alive in the NFC, if Green Bay obviously wants to stay alive in the NFC North, I don't think they can lose another game at home. I think Packers fans would start to get a little bit antsy about where that thing's headed. Is Jordan Love their quarterback of the future if the Rams come in and beat them at home and they go to 2-6? I think that'd be tough to come back from. So, and
an interesting move from them yesterday, trading Rasul Douglas, a veteran corner that's been there for a long time and has played a lot of snaps for them. Buffalo certainly needed a corner, so it made sense in what they got back, but an interesting move to see the Packers kind of selling a little bit at the deadline.
So we get to watch football, and like you said, there's some good games. The Lions get a chance to do some self-reflection. They get some rest. They get a little maybe vacay, and then you come back refreshed and ready to roll the second half of the season. I've got Field Yates from ESPN. He's going to join me next. We're going to talk about Detroit from maybe a little bit more of a national perspective. Field is always great anytime I talk to him, have him on the podcast, so enjoy that one because he's coming up next. Welcome back to the 20 in the Huddle podcast presented by Microsoft, and I am very happy to welcome in Field Yates. Does a great job with ESPN, the Fantasy Focus podcast, everything the National Football League, and really anything sports-wise. Field, thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. Feels like a great time to catch up. The Lions in a very, very good spot as they head into the well-deserved bye week. I imagine people are incredibly proud and pleased with the effort so far, with a lot of work left to do in the second half, but some very attainable goals within reach.
Yeah, 6-2 at the bye, playing pretty good football. And you looked at the atmosphere at Ford Field on Monday night. I don't know if you caught it or not, but it's been electric all year. The fans have traveled on the road, but if they could get a home playoff game, Field, I think that would be such advantage Detroit, because this city, this fan base has been waiting for this moment, waiting for this kind of a team, and to be 6-2 at this point, they're really, really excited. But let's get into maybe the most recent news, and that's obviously the trade deadline that happened on Tuesday. Detroit, makes a move with Cleveland, sends a 2025 6th-round pick to Cleveland to get wide receiver Donovan Peoples-Jones. Maybe just your first reaction to that move.
My first thought was Marvin Jones has to leave the team for personal reasons. You're a body short there at wide receiver, and there are not a bunch of guys available on the free agent market right now that can do what you need to do in that Marvin Jones role, which not to say that Donovan Peoples-Jones and Marvin are the exact same style of player. Donovan probably has a bit more vertical ability than Marvin does at this stage of his career. But I certainly heard Brad Holmes talk about sort of the local appeal as well. DPJ being from, I think I saw from Dan Wetzel that he went to high school less than a mile away from Ford Field, which is incredible that he is right back almost literally in his own backyard. But
a reasonable Tech, which is a stone throw away there.
How about that? That's amazing. Yeah, I hope he's probably played a game at Ford Field, if I had to imagine. I don't know exactly what kind of a program they have there at Cass Tech, but if they're any good at football, they probably played a game at Ford Field at some point. So cool sort of symmetry with bringing DPJ back, but a depth option there. And obviously this offense has been very good, top 7 in the NFL in both total offense and total defense. But wide receiver depth is probably one area where if the Lions maybe look a touch vulnerable on offense, that's probably the one spot you would point to, but it really hasn't slowed them down that much so far this regular season.
Yeah, Cass Tech, by the way, is a powerhouse here.
Oh, I learned something.
Donovan Peoples-Jones has played a state championship game that are hosted at Ford Field every year, so a little bit of a homecoming for him. Were you a little bit surprised they didn't make a move for on defense, cornerback, pass rush? I know fans are maybe split 50-50 here on wanting maybe to do something like that. Were you surprised at all?
I was not totally surprised because I think we learned something pretty quickly yesterday, which was that there were a couple of different price tags that were out there for players that were sort of premium level. One was what we saw in the division, NFC North, which was the Bears sending a 2nd-round pick for Montez Sweat. When you have 2 wins in the regular season and Montez Sweat is in the prime of his career, but with just 9 games left in this regular season available, that's not the kind of trade that you make to just have the guy for the rest of this season. That was a let's sign him to a long-term deal type of trade. Yep. Not that the Lions couldn't afford that. They have good financial flexibility going forward. I know this is probably not something that Lions fans have been thinking a ton about because the team's been in a different state for the past however many years, but every player brought in going forward has to fit into the financial puzzle a whole lot more than they've been accustomed to, right? Because all of a sudden you got a bunch of good players, right? I mean, Aiden Hutchinson, I know this is still over a year away, but it's also only a little over a year away, right?
It's
that could
coming.
be a $30 million player in March of 2025, or maybe even January, February of 2025. And, Amon-Ra St. Brown, same deal with him, right? How great has he been and how much is he worth going forward? And Jared Goff, who, they've sort of touched on the idea of an extension for Jared at some point without saying that a deal was imminent or anything like that. But I would imagine Jared's going to be the quarterback for quite some time in Detroit. And as you know well, the price tag for a quarterback is not, $10 million, right? It's about 4 to 5 times that. Yeah. So I would not totally be surprised that there was not a big splashy move. And, we saw a Chase Young trade to San Francisco, which struck me as very much of the rental category, right? Because if you're trading a 3rd round pick for a guy that is, I would say, in a similar boat. Not necessarily quite. I would say right now, Montez Sweat's the superior player to Chase Young in terms of just sort of consistency and sort of dependability because of the health. But Chase goes for what probably will be a low back end of the third round. As a matter of fact, it will be a back end of the third round pick because it's one of the 49ers compensatory picks, as they announced yesterday. So you can trade compensatory picks that are awarded as a result of a diversity coaching or general manager hire. So it is going to be pick 100, 102. That's a sign that this deal is probably of the rental variety. And if you're Detroit, I think that's a justifiable thing to do, but there's a fine line there because you can only make those kind of moves every so often. And I thought it was a reasonable gamble by San Francisco, but to sort of bring it all back to the Lions, I wasn't totally surprised by the lack of inactivity because on the defense side of the ball, because while there were more trades than usual, there were still only 8 or 10 total trades yesterday. So being involved in one at least put them in the mix.
One other name too, you talked about some of the deals or potential deals coming up for Detroit and some of the extensions down the road. Penei Sewell might reset the tackle market as well, so that's another one to include in there too. So now you're talking about 3, 4, 5 guys that are going to be amongst the top paid. So to your point, you've got to be looking a little bit more long term as well. All right, we talked about it off the top, how this team is at 6-2, feeling really good about themselves, coming off a win on Monday night. It wasn't the best performance, but look, good teams find ways to win those games.
That's right.
And when you look at the first 8 games of Detroit, I'm just curious, Field Yates from ESPN, what do you like about this team? What's maybe one area that gives you a little bit of pause, a little bit of concern that you'd maybe like to see them clean up a little bit the second half of the season?
Well, there are 2 things, and I guess they kind of tie together. One is they found different ways to win now, because to your point, you scored 1 offensive touchdown on Monday, and you still found a way to win. And it was a 12-point game. It didn't feel like a 12-point game, right? It felt like a more disparate scoring output there. But the fact that they're winning games in different ways is, to me, a sort of real evolution, I should say, from where they have been in prior years. I mean, even last year when they were awesome down the stretch, 7-2 during their final 9 games. There still was a little bit of, it felt like some of those games were, and they started to pick things up defensively, but it felt like the offense was going to have to carry a little bit more of the load week in and week out, whereas it feels like defensively now, you can tighten the screws in a few different ways on opposing offenses. The pass rush has been at times outstanding. Aiden looks like future defensive player of the year type of guy. Yeah. That's a hard honor to earn because only one player gets it. But that's the kind of skill set and the kind of tenacity that he has shown early on in year 2 here, I guess halfway through year 2. And then the secondary, some of these pieces that you spent real money on this past offseason, you have to hit on them. And, Cam Sutton's looked like the absolute real deal. And to do some of this without CJ Gardner-Johnson has been extremely impressive as well. Brian Branch being in and out of the lineup has certainly hurt. But, I mean, that draft class from this past year, which was discussed a lot, so I know for a variety of different reasons, whether you loved the picks, whether you thought the picks were, whether you were anti-drafting a running back or a linebacker in the first round person, or you thought it was the best draft of the entire NFL, you can't deny the production right now. And their top 4 guys have all made meaningful contributions to winning. And so this Lions team getting the job done in multiple different ways is one of the themes. And then the fact that we're talking about them winning defensively is also essential because they've poured a lot of resources into that defense. And I mean, I will remember the time in the middle of the year last year where it felt like, Dan Campbell's having to defend Aaron Glenn, like the fact that he's sticking with him as the defensive coordinator. And I was having this conversation actually with some colleagues at ESPN recently. And we were all remarking on how Aaron Glenn will be an outstanding head coach one day, has so much respect around the NFL. And I'm glad that Dan Campbell stuck by him because it's so fun to see this defense playing the kind of football that the paper talent, which, is not always worth its weight in paper, but the paper talent is good enough that they should be a good defense, and to be top 7 in total defense, and that is specifically related to yards allowed. That to me is extremely, extremely impressive.
and to maybe potentially get come December, guys like C.J. Gardner-Johnson back, guys like James Houston, who were hurt, week 2. They've done this without, two guys that were obviously expected to play, big roles on defense. So they've had guys step up. They're playing pretty good football on that side of the ball right now. So, Field, you look at this team. Is this an NFC Championship / Super Bowl caliber type team when you watch them? Why or maybe why not?
Yeah, I think they're part of I would think that right now it's probably 5 teams that strike me as the cream of the crop in the NFC. And maybe you could divide, maybe Philadelphia has been the most impressive top to bottom, because while I think there are Eagles fans that would tell you it hasn't always been pretty for them, the sign of a good team, and you talked about this with the Lions just a few minutes ago, Tim, is that you find ways to win. And so when you're the only team in the NFL with 1 loss, that to me speaks for itself. But I would say that Philadelphia, Dallas, Detroit, and both San Francisco and Seattle have a chance to make some real noise once the playoffs roll around. The truth of the NFL now is that bye means more than it did a couple of years ago, because one team gets it. You're 1 win away from playing in the NFC Championship game at home, by the way, of course, because you only get that number 1 that bye with the number 1 seed. So I would say that Detroit is definitely in that mix. And I would say areas that will determine exactly how far they go would be, offensively, if there are teams, and I don't know that I've seen one that has really screamed that they can do this, but that can slow down one dimension of the offense. If they can slow down, Amon-Ra St. Brown, is somebody going to be capable of stepping up? Is it going to be is Sam Laporta's presence enough? Is Jameson Williams going to have more consistent output? Whether it's Josh Reynolds or Khalif Raymond or Donovan Peoples-Jones, can they get something out of the complementary receivers? And then, defensively, some of the things they've been doing are very impressive. Sacks and splash plays and turnovers are really, really impressive, but they're not always predictable. And if you can keep those up, then you got a real chance, because this team obviously plays with, I would say, probably as much competitive toughness as really any team in the NFL. That is definitely, that stems from the head coach they play for. And the confidence is off the charts right now. They believe that this is not, just some feel good story. I think this team strikes me as they think they're as good as anybody in the NFL, and they've had pretty good reason to feel that way. They got some real signature wins, and beating the defending champs in their place in week 1 was a great way to set the tone for the season. And I know that the Lions would never say this themselves out loud, but when you're 2 games up in the division and the team that's closest to you in the standings just lost its starting quarterback for the rest of this season, it's hard not to be thinking big week 9 going into your bye.
Yeah, 100%. It'll be interesting. Some good games this week. Dallas and Philadelphia. That'll define some things in the NFC a little bit too. Seattle and Baltimore, the 2 teams that beat Detroit, are playing each other. So the Lions fans will enjoy some of the games, some of the competition while on their bye week. You mentioned Dan Campbell, and it brings up my next question. Again, I'm with Field Yates. Does a great job with ESPN. Check out the Fantasy Focus podcast of his. It's terrific. Dan Campbell, from the national perspective, obviously early on, it was the knee biting and some of that kind of stuff, but you look at how this team has evolved. You alluded to it a little bit, and their play early on. Has the narrative around him a little bit from a national perspective changed a little bit, and people now appreciate just what kind of coach he is, from an offensive mind to a team motivator to everything else?
Yeah, because I think there is a little bit of this progression as a coach, where it's you got the sense that guys would want to play hard for Dan pretty early, right? Because he obviously pours as much into this as maybe any coach in the NFL, right? I mean, I thought that interview before the game on Monday night with Michelle Buck-Beisner was awesome. And just seeing how much he means to him, right? I mean, this is his life. These guys are
that's him,
like his kids, right? Yeah, that's him every single day. But it's not just a guy who says the right things at the right time. You've seen, and Ben Johnson obviously deserves a ton of credit for this, right? But there's, this team is well coached. This team is well coached offensively. They're well coached defensively. I think the game management from Dan Campbell has been really solid for the most part this season. The aggression on 4th down, and we saw this last year, right? I mean, the Week 18 win over Green Bay was a great example of it. You're not settling for the chance to maybe win the game, but going out there and just winning it. That kind of stuff, I think, really can carry over from one season to the next. And it seems like their confidence in Dan Campbell is unwavering. So it's been great to see him, kind of get the spotlight and the recognition that he deserves, even though if I had to imagine, he probably cares. Maybe Belichick cares less about the attention than any coach in the NFL, but Dan Campbell's probably up there too, right? I mean, this guy just wants to coach football and just do his job. So he's not doing it for people telling him how good he is at doing it. He's doing it because he would bleed. He would probably do anything for the 53 guys on the roster, plus the however many guys on IR, the other 16 on the practice squad, and you name it. I mean, he is all ball all the time. So it's been fun to see that development.
No, 100%. You certainly have a pulse on Dan Campbell. Final one from me, Field. You look at, quarterback Jared Goff is playing so well. It has been now for a couple of years, arguably playing the best football of his career. I think a lot of people forget that he's 29 years old. I mean, we're not talking about a 32, 33-year-old quarterback here. He's got a lot of future in this league. You look at some of the other young stars that we talked about, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Aiden Hutchinson and Penei Sewell and some of the veterans on this team as well that are still fairly young. You just look at some of the stars, the core on this team. Is this a Detroit Lions team, in your opinion, that's now built for sustained success with what Brad has done, continues to do in the draft, and what Dan and his coaching staff are doing as well?
Yeah, the hardest part for Lions now, they might not have that many premium picks anymore, right? Like, picking in the top 5 is it stinks during the regular season, but it's great from January to April. You're sitting there and you're deciding, all right, well, if Ian Hutchinson falls to pick 2, we'll just take him and not think twice about it. Last year with that 6 overall pick, which of course was not because of their own record, but that the Matthew Stafford trade, which of course worked out great for both sides. And I would say the Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff trade is probably the more accurate way of describing it. So it might be a little bit different in terms of getting guys in the door, blue chip prospect wise, but they're set up for it. They are set up for it right now, and they're going to be opportunistic. I get the sense that they're going to be willing to not just settle and be aggressive. And I just think that it's been, well, it hasn't been that long, right? This is not like year 7 of Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes.
Right.
This is year 3, right? So this is not that long into it, but the plan has really quickly come together to the point that you've got buy-in, it seems like, across the board. And it's like, there are a couple of things that can prevent you from progressing. One would be a quarterback problem. They don't have that. 2 would be, if you have guys that are, contractually in a bad spot for your roster, they just make too much money. There's not a lot of that on the roster either, right? I mean, They're going to have relatively clean books. And I, by the way, describe clean books not just as like, hey, we've got a lot of money going forward that we can spend. It's, if you don't have that much money, it's because you've paid the right players the right amount. I think their books are relatively clean going forward. So if we saw anything from this past free agency, is that they're willing to be in the mix on a lot of key players, and you've got guys that want to come to Detroit now, and typically winning breeds more interest. So this is the start of, maybe not the start, but this is the next step in what is, I think the start took place 2 years ago, but this is the next step in what could be, maybe one of the teams that for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years is right there in the mix every season in the NFC.
No, Field, you have Lions fans excited, man. You have them excited. Look, it's an exciting time here. 6-2, obviously, a great spot to be going into their bye week. They're going to rest up, do some self-evaluation, and then it's week 10 at the Los Angeles Chargers, which should be a good matchup on the road. Having to go out west, yeah. But this is a Lions team that doesn't face. I think they got one team with a winning record the second half of the year. Things are lined up. It's an exciting time here. It should be a fun second half to the season, and you're going to come along for the ride, I'm sure. So Field Yates from ESPN, I really appreciate you taking the time. Great stuff as always, and have fun watching the games this weekend in the second half of the season.
I can tell you this, Tim, I will be along for the ride because my co-host in the Fantasy Focus, Daniel Dopp, is a Michigan native, lifelong diehard Lions fan, and we play in a fantasy league together. It's the Michigan Men Fantasy League, where it's only people from Michigan, except for me. They let one guy in from Massachusetts. And the passion of those 9 Michigan men and huge Lions fans bleeds through the text message pretty much all throughout the week. But Sundays, I swear I get a play-by-play. Like, I don't even have to watch the game because pretty much every play they text about it. So I will be along for the ride, and it has been a very cheery and upbeat group this year.
Awesome. Great job, Fields. Thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it. And hopefully I run into you here sometime the second half of the season.
I hope I run into you in Las Vegas in February, Tim. That's what I want.
Yeah, that would be fun, wouldn't it?
I'll take that. That would be awesome.
All right, Field. Appreciate you.
Thank you.